The stone corridors of Blackwood Castle were never meant to hold such cold secrets. Catherine pressed her hand against the damp tapestry, her breath catching in her dry throat. Through the heavy oak door of the solar, the fire crackled cheerfully, casting a warm, golden glow into the dark hallway. But the warmth inside did not reach her shivering frame. Inside stood Lord Henry, the man who held her heart and her absolute devotion, and Lady Alice, the beautiful daughter of the neighboring earl. Catherine had come to bring Henry his evening tea, a quiet, intimate ritual they had shared every single night for the past 5 years. Instead, she was greeted by words that shattered her fragile world into pieces. "I understand your father's wishes, Alice," Henry's deep voice echoed softly, filled with a gentle reverence that Catherine had always believed belonged solely to her. "The winter is long, but when the spring comes, our families will finally be joined. I promise you a future worthy of your grace, and Blackwood Castle will be your home." Alice smiled, her soft laughter sounding like silver bells ringing in the quiet night. "And what of Catherine?" Alice asked, her voice dipping into a soft, cautious curiosity. Henry sighed, a sound that felt heavier than the ancient castle stones. "Catherine is a dear, sweet part of my past, but a lord must look to the future of his lands and his people. She will understand." Every single word felt like a physical blow against Catherine's chest, stealing the air from her lungs. Yet, she did not drop the silver tray. She did not cry out, nor did she let a single tear fall. Years of quiet dignity and grace had taught her how to carry sorrow without making a sound. Slowly, carefully, she backed away from the heavy door, her soft leather slippers making no noise on the cold stone floor. She returned to her small chamber in the East Tower, the room Henry had decorated for her with soft wool blankets, fresh candles, and dried lavender. The fire in her own hearth was dying, casting long, mournful shadows across the stone walls. She looked down at her trembling hands. On her right hand sat a simple silver band, carved with the delicate image of a swallow, a gift Henry had given her when they were just foolish, hopeful youths, long before he inherited the grand title of Lord. He had told her then that swallows always return home. But Blackwood was no longer her home. With steady, determined fingers, Catherine slipped the precious ring from her finger and placed it gently on the center of the small wooden table. She did not pack a heavy trunk to slow her down. She took only her sturdiest winter cloak, a small leather pouch of coins she had earned through her own hard work, and a small book of poetry Henry had once read aloud to her. The castle was fast asleep when she made her way down the winding stairs. The old guardsman at the gate, Arthur, was nodding off by the iron brazier. He blinked sleepily as Catherine approached, a small lantern in her hand. "My lady? Where are you going at this midnight hour? The snow is beginning to fall quite heavily," he murmured, rubbing his eyes. Catherine offered him a small, bittersweet smile, her voice steady despite the agonizing ache in her throat. "A family emergency in the lower valley, Arthur. I must leave before the mountain paths are completely blocked by the storm." The old man trusted her completely, for she had always been kind to everyone in the castle. He raised the heavy iron bar and opened the small wooden postern gate, just wide enough for her to pass through. "May the heavens protect your journey, Lady Catherine," he said softly. "Thank you, Arthur, for everything," she whispered, her voice nearly lost to the rising wind. She stepped out into the freezing night. The cold wind immediately caught her dark wool cloak, wrapping it tightly around her slender frame. White snowflakes began to dust her dark hair, melting against her warm cheeks like the tears she refused to shed in that house of betrayal. She did not look back at the grand, imposing towers of Blackwood Castle. She knew that if she looked back, her courage might fail her, and she needed every ounce of strength to survive the lonely journey ahead. As the first light of dawn began to paint the winter horizon in shades of pale rose and gold, Catherine reached the edge of the ancient forest. Behind her, the castle would soon awaken to a new day. Henry would find the cold tea, the empty room and the lonely silver ring resting on the table. But he would never find her again. The winter storm showed no mercy as Catherine moved further away from the only home she had known for 5 years. Her small hired cart groaned heavily under the weight of the endless snowfall on the desolate mountain pass. Suddenly, a sharp, terrible crack echoed through the freezing, empty air. The old wooden axle of the cart snapped completely in half, sending the small vehicle violently tilting into a deep snowbank. The elderly driver shook his head in defeat, declaring that they could not travel another inch until the spring thaw. Catherine stood alone in the biting, relentless wind, clutching her thin wool cloak tightly around her trembling shoulders. The brutal cold was quickly seeping into her fragile bones, threatening to freeze the very blood in her veins. Her soft leather slippers, meant for the warm stone floors of Blackwood Castle, were completely soaked through with icy water. For a brief, agonizing moment, the absolute darkness of the forest made her wonder if her quiet escape had been a fatal mistake. But the fresh memory of Henry's voice, promising his future to Lady Alice, fueled the small fire of pride still burning in her heart. She would rather perish in the unforgiving wilderness than live as a forgotten shadow in the corner of another woman's stolen castle. As the pale sun began to dip completely below the horizon, her legs grew dangerously numb. Just as she was about to collapse against a frozen pine tree, the heavy, rhythmic thud of approaching hooves broke through the howling wind. A grand, sturdy carriage, drawn by 4 massive dark horses, slowly emerged from the blinding white fury of the blizzard. The magnificent carriage halted safely beside the broken cart, and its heavy wooden door immediately swung open. A tall gentleman with striking silver hair stepped out fearlessly into the knee-deep snow. His face was lined with a quiet, dignified sorrow, but his eyes held an undeniable, deep kindness. This was Lord Thomas of Oakhaven, a widely respected widower who knew the heavy burden of grief all too well. "My dear lady, you will surely perish out here in this terrible storm." His deep, soothing voice cut through the freezing gale. He did not rudely demand her name or question her sudden presence in the wild, only offering immediate rescue. With a gentle, respectful hand, he guided the shivering Catherine into the warm, luxurious interior of his carriage. He carefully draped a heavy, incredibly soft wolf fur blanket over her trembling shoulders. Sitting quietly in the opposite corner of the velvet seat was a young girl, no older than 7. The child was tightly clutching a worn cloth doll, her large eyes holding the exact same quiet loneliness that Catherine felt in her own soul. This was Lily, Lord Thomas's only child, a little girl who had lost her mother to a tragic winter fever 3 years ago. The sweet little girl stared at Catherine for a long moment before slowly offering her a small, hesitant but beautiful smile. Catherine gratefully pulled the thick fur blanket closer, her frozen fingers shaking uncontrollably as the divine warmth finally hit her. As the heavy carriage began to roll safely away from the deadly storm, Thomas gently poured her a cup of hot, spiced wine from a silver flask. "The southern mountain roads are completely closed now, and my estate is just over the next ridge," he explained softly, handing her the silver cup. "My sweet Lily has been without a gentle governess for many months, and she rarely smiles at strangers." He looked fondly at his precious daughter, then turned his warm, steady gaze back to Catherine. "If you have nowhere else to be, and no family waiting for you in this terrible weather, Oakhaven would be deeply honored to offer you shelter." Catherine looked from the kind, weary lord to the sweet, silent, motherless child. She had left her entire old life behind in a single night, but perhaps destiny was suddenly offering her a beautiful new purpose. "I would be profoundly grateful for your kindness, my lord," Catherine whispered, her voice finally steady and clear. The brutal storm continued to rage fiercely outside the thick glass windows. But inside the safe, moving carriage, the thick ice surrounding Catherine's broken heart slowly began to thaw.
A full month had passed since the brutal winter storm brought Catherine to the safe haven of Oak Haven. In those 30 quiet days, she had slowly transformed the gloomy estate back into a home filled with warmth and gentle light. Little Lily no longer hid in the cold, dark corners of the grand manor. Instead, the sweet child now followed Catherine everywhere, holding her hand with a fierce, quiet devotion. Even Lord Thomas seemed to carry his heavy grief a little lighter these days. His stern, weathered face often softened into a genuine smile when he watched Catherine reading patiently to his daughter by the fire. Tonight, the grand hall of Oakhaven was brightly lit with hundreds of fragrant beeswax candles to celebrate the passing of midwinter. Soft lute music drifted through the warm air, mingling with the cheerful chatter of the local gentry. Catherine wore a modest but beautifully tailored gown of deep blue velvet, a generous gift from Thomas to thank her for her tireless care. The rich color brought out the healthy glow that had finally returned to her pale cheeks. She stood near the roaring hearth, gracefully arranging a tall vase of dried white winter roses. For the first time in weeks, she felt a profound sense of peace that she thought she had lost forever. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the grand hall swung wide open to welcome the final guests of the evening. Lord Henry of Blackwood and his betrothed, Lady Alice. The elderly steward announced loudly over the gentle music. Catherine's hands instantly froze mid-air, a sharp thorn from a rose violently pricking her delicate finger. She had absolutely no idea that Blackwood bordered Oakhaven's vast lands to the north. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head, her breath catching painfully in her tight chest. Henry stepped into the warm candlelight, looking just as commanding and striking as she remembered. Alice stood gracefully by his side, draped in expensive silk, her arm looped securely and proudly through his. But Henry was not looking at his beautiful, noble betrothed. Nor was he politely greeting his wealthy host. His piercing dark eyes had swept across the crowded room and instantly locked onto the woman standing by the fireplace. He stopped completely dead in his tracks, as if he had been struck by a terrible bolt of lightning. For 4 agonizing sleepless weeks, he had searched the frozen mountain passes like a desperate madman. He had been utterly terrified that she had perished alone in the merciless snow because of his cruel words. He had stared at the empty silver ring on his desk every single night, the heavy weight of his foolish mistake slowly crushing his spirit. Now, here she was, standing perfectly alive and breathtakingly beautiful in another man's grand home. Catherine did not quickly look away in pain, nor did she lower her eyes in the quiet submission he was so used to seeing.
She met his deeply shocked stare with a calm, unbreakable dignity that she had carefully forged in the freezing wilderness. Before Henry could take a single, frantic step toward her, Lord Thomas appeared at her side. Thomas gently offered Catherine a crisp, white linen handkerchief to carefully wipe the small drop of blood from her pricked finger. The older lord's voice was low and deeply affectionate as he leaned in to inspect her hand. Henry watched this incredibly intimate, tender exchange, and a violently bitter taste of pure jealousy flooded his mouth. The absolute, devastating realization of what he had casually thrown away finally hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was no longer the quiet, invisible shadow waiting patiently in his lonely East Tower. She was a radiant, highly respected woman who had effortlessly drawn the admiration of a wealthy and powerful lord. Alice gently tugged on Henry's stiff arm, highly confused by his sudden, terrifying stillness. "Henry, whatever is the matter with you?" she whispered, trying to follow his frozen, devastated gaze. He could not even bring himself to answer her, for his throat was completely tight with a suffocating, unbearable panic. He had arrogantly promised Alice the future, but looking at Catherine now, he knew his future was nothing but an empty wasteland without her. He took a desperate, shaking step forward, entirely ignoring the crowded room and the strict rules of polite society. But Catherine merely turned gracefully away, calmly taking Thomas's offered arm. Without a single backward glance, she completely vanished into the elegant crowd, leaving him to drown in his own miserable regret. She met his deeply shocked stare with a calm, unbreakable dignity that she had carefully forged in the freezing wilderness. Before Henry could take a single frantic step toward her, Lord Thomas appeared at her side. Thomas gently offered Catherine a crisp, white linen handkerchief to carefully wipe the small drop of blood from her pricked finger. The older lord's voice was low and deeply affectionate as he leaned in to inspect her hand. Henry watched this incredibly intimate, tender exchange, and a violently bitter taste of pure jealousy flooded his mouth. The absolute, devastating realization of what he had casually thrown away finally hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was no longer the quiet, invisible shadow waiting patiently in his lonely East Tower. She was a radiant, highly respected woman who had effortlessly drawn the admiration of a wealthy and powerful lord. Alice gently tugged on Henry's stiff arm, highly confused by his sudden, terrifying stillness. "Henry, whatever is the matter with you?" she whispered, trying to follow his frozen, devastated gaze. He could not even bring himself to answer her, for his throat was completely tight with a suffocating, unbearable panic. He had arrogantly promised Alice the future, but looking at Catherine now, he knew his future was nothing but an empty wasteland without her. He took a desperate, shaking step forward, entirely ignoring the crowded room and the strict rules of polite society. But Catherine merely turned gracefully away, calmly taking Thomas's offered arm. Without a single backward glance, she completely vanished into the elegant crowd, leaving him to drown in his own miserable regret. The quiet winter garden at the edge of the grand hall offered a brief, fragrant sanctuary from the suffocating crowd. The air inside the glass walls was thick with the soothing scent of blooming night jasmine and damp, warm earth. Catherine leaned heavily against the cold stone frame of the arched window, trying to calm her racing heart. She had spent 4 long, arduous weeks meticulously rebuilding her shattered peace, only to have it threatened in a single heartbeat. Suddenly, heavy and frantic footsteps echoed sharply against the marble floor of the adjoining corridor. She did not need to turn around to know exactly who had recklessly followed her into the dimly lit sanctuary. "Catherine, please wait." Henry's voice cracked in the quiet night, sounding entirely unlike the proud, unyielding lord she had loved for 5 years. She slowly turned to face him, her beautiful deep blue velvet gown rustling softly against the stone floor. He stood only a few feet away, his dark eyes wide with a desperate, agonizing mixture of relief and absolute terror. He had completely abandoned Lady Alice in the middle of the crowded hall, totally uncaring of the scandalous whispers he left behind. "I thought I had lost you forever to the merciless winter storm," he breathed out, taking a hesitant, trembling step forward. "You did lose me, my lord," Catherine replied, her voice as calm and steady as the surface of a frozen lake. Henry flinched visibly, as if her polite, painfully formal title had physically struck him across the face. "Please, I beg of you, do not look at me with such terrible coldness," he pleaded, his hands shaking as he reached out toward her. "Every single day since you disappeared has been a living nightmare of my own foolish making." He looked desperately at her empty right hand, his heart breaking all over again at the permanent absence of the silver swallow ring. "Come back to Blackwood with me tonight, Catherine," he begged, his aristocratic pride completely shattered into dust. "I swear upon my life that I will break the betrothal to Alice tomorrow morning." A sad, quiet smile touched Catherine's pale lips, but the warmth did not reach her weary eyes. "And what makes you think I would ever want a man who breaks his sacred vows so easily?" she asked softly. Her words were not spoken in bitter anger, but with a profound, quiet clarity that cut much deeper than any blade. "You promised her a future worthy of her grace, Henry, while I stood freezing outside your door. You speak of changing your mind now, but you still do not understand what you permanently broke. The devoted woman who would have happily lived in your shadow died that night in the bitter snow. Henry opened his mouth to argue, to beg, to offer her anything her heart desired. But the desperate words died in his tight throat. He saw the absolute terrifying truth in her clear eyes. She was not waiting to be convinced. She was simply, irrevocably done with him. Before the heavy silence could stretch any further, the imposing figure of Lord Thomas stepped firmly into the archway. "Is everything quite all right here, Lady Catherine?" Thomas asked, his tone perfectly polite but layered with a dangerous protective warning. He stepped smoothly between them, his tall, broad frame completely shielding Catherine from Henry's desperate gaze. "Lord Henry was just leaving to rejoin his betrothed, my lord," Catherine said gracefully, stepping instinctively closer to Thomas. The subtle, incredibly natural way she sought safety near the older lord made Henry's chest completely cave in. Thomas nodded slightly, his cold, uncompromising gaze locked onto the younger lord with quiet authority. "I believe Lady Alice is anxiously looking for you, Lord Henry," Thomas said firmly, leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Oakhaven is a peaceful estate, and we simply do not tolerate the distress of our esteemed household members." Henry stood completely paralyzed, stripped of his dignity, his grand title, and his fragile, foolish hopes. He had ruled Blackwood with an iron will, but here, in the face of Catherine's quiet strength and Thomas's protective grace, he was utterly powerless. With a final, devastating look at the remarkable woman who used to be his entire world, Henry slowly turned away as he walked back toward the bright, noisy hall. He finally understood the true, unburgable cost of his betrayal. He had not merely lost his one true love, he had handed her directly into the arms of a much better man. The bitter cold of that fateful winter night finally exacted its heavy toll on the arrogant Lord Henry. Upon returning to the dark, empty halls of Blackwood Castle, he collapsed completely on the unforgiving stone floor. A violent, burning fever quickly consumed his strong body, dragging him dangerously close to the very edge of death. The finest physicians in the county merely shook their heads, declaring that the young lord had completely lost the will to live. Even Lady Alice stood weeping helplessly by his door, utterly terrified by the dying man who relentlessly whispered another woman's name. Desperate and sobbing, the faithful old guardsman Arthur mounted a swift horse and rode blindly through the dangerous snow towards Oakhaven. When the exhausted old man fell to his knees in Oakhaven's warm hall, Catherine's gentle heart ached with profound pity. He desperately begged to use her vast knowledge of wild herbs to save the master she had once loved so deeply. Catherine did not hesitate for a single moment, for her pure soul could never allow any human being to suffer if she could prevent it. Lord Thomas immediately ordered his own carriage prepared, insisting on fiercely protecting her on the difficult journey back to her painful past. Walking back into the grand, familiar bedchamber of Blackwood Castle felt entirely like stepping into a stranger's forgotten tomb. Henry lay pale and motionless among the heavy velvet curtains, his ragged, shallow breathing sounding like a terrible death rattle. Catherine calmly went to work, her steady hands expertly mixing bitter willow bark, dried feverfew, and cool spring water. She did not look at the luxurious room where she had once dreamed of becoming his cherished wife. For 3 exhausting days and nights, she patiently forced the healing medicine past his dry lips and bathed his burning forehead. Thomas sat quietly in the corner of the dim room the entire time, acting as an unwavering mountain of silent, respectful support. On the quiet morning of the 4th day, the terrible fever finally broke, and Henry slowly opened his tired, hollow eyes. Through his blurred, aching vision, he saw the beautiful face of the only woman he would ever truly love. A fragile, desperate spark of hope instantly lit up his broken soul, making him foolishly believe his agonizing prayers had been answered. "You came back to me, my sweet Catherine," he whispered weakly, struggling with all his remaining strength to reach out and touch her warm hand. Catherine gently but firmly stepped back, completely removing herself from his desperate, trembling reach. Her beautiful eyes were perfectly clear, holding immense, saintly compassion, but absolutely no trace of the romantic devotion he so desperately craved. "I came to save a dying man, Lord Henry, just as I would save a wounded bird freezing in the winter snow," she answered softly. The terrible, cold finality in her gentle voice struck him much harder than the deadly fever ever could. "I have healed your broken body, but I can no longer be the one to heal your lonely heart," she continued with absolute quiet dignity. "You must live a very long and prosperous life, Henry, and you must finally learn to honor the solemn vows you made to Lady Alice. You are no longer my lord, and I am no longer your waiting shadow. This is my final act of kindness to you, and you must never, ever look for me again." She turned away from his weeping eyes and gracefully accepted the warm, waiting hand of Lord Thomas, who had already stepped forward to guide her home. As the heavy oak door closed firmly behind her, Henry finally understood the true depth of his punishment. He had survived the terrible winter fever, only to face an endless, agonizing lifetime of unendurable regret. The heavy stone walls of Blackwood Castle had never felt so utterly lifeless and cold. Though Lord Henry had miraculously survived the terrible winter fever, his broken spirit had clearly died the day Catherine walked away forever. He spent his endless, agonizing days locked inside his dark, gloomy bedchamber, completely refusing all comfort and polite company. He would simply sit in his large armchair by the dying fire, endlessly turning the small silver swallow ring over in his trembling hands. Lady Alice stood quietly outside his heavy oak door one dreary morning, listening to the suffocating silence within the room. She was a proud, highly educated daughter of a powerful earl, raised to command respect and run a grand household with absolute grace. For weeks, she had patiently tried to be a dutiful, comforting presence to the man who was supposed to be her future husband. But watching his desperate, pathetic longing for another woman had slowly and permanently chipped away at her noble pride. She finally realized the heartbreaking truth that she could never awaken a man who was determined to sleep in his own miserable regret. She absolutely refused to spend the rest of her precious life as a forgotten ghost in a marriage entirely built on lies and stolen dreams. With a deep, steadying breath, Alice pushed open the heavy wooden door without bothering to knock softly. Henry did not even look up in the small silver ring, his hollow, dark eyes completely lost in his painful, distant memories. Alice walked calmly toward his large wooden desk, her expensive silk gown whispering softly against the cold stone floor. She did not scream in bitter anger, nor did she shed a single tear of sorrow for the broken, pitiful man before her. Slowly, she unclasped the heavy gold and ruby necklace he had given her on the joyous day of their grand betrothal. She placed the precious jewel gently onto the dark wood of his desk, the quiet click sounding like a loud thunderclap in the silent room. "I am returning to my father's estate today, Lord Henry," Alice announced, her clear voice ringing with unbreakable dignity. Henry finally raised his tired, pale head, his blank expression showing absolutely no surprise or frantic protest. "You boldly promised me a beautiful future, but your heart clearly belongs to a past you foolishly threw away," she continued softly. "I am worth far more than the broken pieces of a man who does not know how to truly love or honor a loyal woman. The betrothal between our noble houses is officially broken as of this very moment." Henry simply closed his aching eyes, a single, silent tear slipping slowly down his pale, hollow cheek. He had absolutely no words of defense to offer, for he knew in his soul that she was speaking the absolute, undeniable truth. Alice turned gracefully away from his defeated figure, her beautiful head held high with the confident grace of a true lady. Within the hour, her grand carriage, heavily loaded with her magnificent dowry and loyal servants, rolled proudly out of the castle gates. She never once looked back at the gloomy towers of Blackwood, eager to embrace a bright, peaceful future entirely of her own making. As the heavy iron gates slammed completely shut behind her carriage, A profound, terrifying silence settled over the entire estate. Henry was finally left completely alone in his grand, empty castle, entirely stripped of his true love, his honor, and his carefully planned future. He was no longer a proud, powerful lord, but merely a forgotten prisoner in a dark cage built entirely by his own terrible mistakes. The harsh, brutal winter finally surrendered to the gentle, warming breeze of early spring. But the long, difficult months of running the grand estate and caring for little Lily had finally taken their toll on Catherine. One quiet morning, she simply could not find the strength to rise from her warm bed, her body burning with a sudden, exhausting fever. For her entire life, she had always been the quiet, steady caretaker who tirelessly tended to the needs of everyone else. She had even nursed a dying Henry back to health with a broken heart, expecting absolutely nothing in return. But Oakhaven was completely different from the cold, ungrateful fortress of Blackwood Castle. The very moment Lord Thomas heard of her sudden illness, he immediately cancelled every single one of his important meetings with the local magistrates. The powerful, highly respected Lord of the Valley practically ran up the stairs to her sunlit chamber, his handsome face pale with genuine worry. He absolutely refused to call for the maids to tend to her, completely unwilling to leave her side for even a single moment. Instead, he calmly rolled up the fine silk sleeves of his expensive shirt and sat firmly on the edge of her soft bed. With incredibly gentle, trembling hands, he carefully placed a cool, damp cloth across her burning forehead. He patiently spooned warm, nourishing chicken broth past her dry lips, constantly murmuring soft, encouraging words that deeply soothed her aching soul. Even little Lily would tiptoe gracefully into the quiet room every afternoon, bringing small, brave bouquets of the very first spring wildflowers. The sweet child would sit quietly at the foot of the bed, her comforting presence a beautiful anchor to the loving family they had slowly built. Catherine had never experienced such profound, unconditional care in all her lonely years at Blackwood Castle. She vividly remembered how Henry had always expected her to remain completely invisible until he suddenly required her gentle comfort. But Lord Thomas saw her completely, valuing her brilliant mind, her kind heart, and her quiet strength above all earthly things. Catherine watched him through her feverish, heavy eyes, her heart swelling with an entirely new, overwhelming kind of pure devotion. This magnificent, powerful man was not demanding her absolute obedience or treating her like a convenient, disposable shadow. He was actively treating her like an incredibly precious, irreplaceable treasure that he was utterly terrified of losing. On the third quiet evening, as the sweet scent of blooming spring jasmine drifted through the open window, her terrible fever finally broke. She weakly turned her head on the soft pillow and found Thomas fast asleep in the heavy wooden chair beside her bed. He was still holding her small, delicate hands securely in his large, warm palms, completely unwilling to let her go even in his dreams. As if sensing her gentle wakefulness, his silver-gray eyes fluttered open, instantly filling with a profound, breathtaking relief. "You gave me a terrible fright, my dearest Catherine," he whispered smoothly, pressing a tender, reverent kiss to her weary knuckles. "I am quite all right now, Lord. I merely need a little rest," she murmured, feeling a sudden, foolish urge to weep from pure joy. Thomas gently brushed a stray lock of dark hair from her pale cheek, his steady gaze infinitely kind and reassuring. "You have spent your entire beautiful life being fiercely strong for everyone else, Catherine," he said softly, his deep voice incredibly thick with emotion. "But I desperately want to be the solid, unwavering wall you can always lean against when you are simply too tired to stand." He looked deeply into her tear-filled eyes, completely laying his noble, honest heart bare before her. "I have walked blindly through the darkest valley of grief, and you were the beautiful, unexpected light that finally brought my soul back to life. I do not merely want you as a capable governess for my daughter, though she already loves you as her own mother. I want you as my absolute equal, my beloved partner, and the beautiful center of my entire world."
Tears of pure, unadulterated happiness finally spilled over Catherine's dark eyelashes, permanently washing away the very last painful remnants of her past. She weakly squeezed his strong, warm hand, offering him the most beautiful, radiant smile she had ever given another living soul. In that quiet, sunlit room, she finally realized she had not just survived the bitter winter storm. She had truly found her way home.
The vibrant heart of spring had officially arrived at Oakhaven, painting the rolling valleys in endless shades of radiant green and gold. Following the beautiful recovery of Catherine's health, a palpable, joyous energy filled every single corner of the grand estate. On a sun-drenched afternoon, standing beneath a magnificent archway of blooming white roses that he had planted with his own hands, Lord Thomas dropped to one knee. He did not offer her a mere silver trinket from his youth, but the magnificent, sprawling diamond ring that had belonged to his cherished mother, a true symbol of his family's honor. With little Lily clapping her tiny, sun-kissed hands in pure, unbridled delight, Catherine gracefully accepted the stunning ring, her eyes shining with tears of absolute happiness. There were no whispers of hesitation or secret political deals this time. It was a pure celebration of two mature, deserving souls who had finally found their way home. To ensure that the entire county understood the immense honor and respect he held for his beautiful bride, Thomas ordered hundreds of grand, gold-embossed invitations to be prepared immediately. These expensive, beautifully crafted documents were sent to every single noble house in the region, declaring the official union between the ancient House of Oakhaven and the radiant Lady Catherine. One of these magnificent golden invitations was duly delivered to the towering, imposing iron gates of Blackwood Castle. The ancient fortress was now entirely quiet, its grand halls dark, silent, and smelling faintly of decay since Lady Alice's dignified departure and Henry's catastrophic fall. The elderly steward, his face lined with profound sorrow, cautiously carried the heavy gold tabulip into the gloomy library. Lord Henry sat alone in the dim room, bathed in a single, watery shaft of spring light that only made his hollow, pale cheeks look even more ghost-like. His once striking beauty was entirely gone, replaced by the ravaged, gaunt mask of a man who had not slept soundly in months. He was still wearing the same crumpled, dirty shirt he had worn for days, endlessly clutching a bottle of dark, cheap wine as his only companion. The steward hesitantly placed the expensive golden invitation onto the dusty desk, immediately stepping back to avoid his lord's unpredictable temper. Henry's shaky, trembling hands moved to open the sealed envelope, his dull eyes widening slightly as he recognized the high quality of the parchment. His heart simply stopped beating when his eyes scanned the first, beautifully calligraphed lines of the elegant script. He read the words, Lady Catherine and Lord Thomas of Oakhaven, as the happy, united couple. His mind completely and finally splintered into a million jagged pieces at the overwhelming, devastating truth of the elegant words. He could vividly imagine Catherine smiling brightly, laughing with pure joy in the warm, protective arms of a powerful, respectable lord who truly cherished her. He could see her standing gracefully before the altar, wearing a stunning white silk gown, permanently making another man's empty home into a loving sanctuary. In that terrible, horrifying moment, Henry finally accepted the crushing, absolute weight of his finality. He was not merely a tragic figure who had made a silly mistake. He was a foolish, destructive man who had thrown away the most precious gift the heavens could ever offer. With a final, shattering cry of unbearable agony and unendurable regret, Henry aggressively grabbed the golden invitation from the desk. He violently yanked the small, neglected silver swallow ring from his right hand, the band he had hopelessly worn since the winter she left him. With a single, devastating movement of absolute defeat, he threw both the grand golden invitation and the simple silver ring into the roaring heart of the roaring fireplace. He watched the bright flames eagerly consume the symbols of her beautiful new beginning and the painful reminders of their shattered past. As the final sparks of his lost love turned to cold, gray ash, The last light of hope and sanity permanently vanished from Henry's dull, dead eyes. He sank back into his large armchair, entirely surrounded by the suffocating darkness of his own making, a forever forgotten prisoner of a silent, dark cage from which there was no possible escape. The intimate, joyous wedding at Oakhaven was a beautiful celebration of two mature souls who had finally found their true equals. But Thomas, understanding the heavy, lingering ghosts that still haunted the northern mountains, made a profound decision for their shared future. He relocated their newly united family to a bustling, sunlit coastal city far away from the dark, cold shadows of Blackwood Castle. The air in this vibrant southern port was always incredibly warm, carrying the soothing, endless scent of exotic spices and fresh salt water. There, surrounded by the calming rhythm of crashing ocean waves, Catherine finally discovered her own extraordinary, undeniable calling. She began to work with the fine, pure clay found in abundance along the beautiful, sun-baked coastal cliffs. Her gentle hands, which had once scrubbed cold stone floors and nursed a dying mane, now shaped the smooth earth into breathtaking works of art. She crafted exquisite, delicate figurines and beautiful artisanal goods that seemed to carry a profound, quiet magic within them. Customers often remarked that holding her delicate creations brought them an unexplainable, deeply healing sense of inner peace. Word of her remarkable talent and her soothing artistic vision quickly sped throughout the wealthy, influential merchant guilds of the busy harbor. Catherine opened a beautiful, sunlit shop facing the ocean, managing the complex trade accounts with the same quiet brilliance she had always possessed. She was no longer merely a rescued governess, nor was she just the sheltered, beautiful wife of a powerful lord. She had transformed into a highly respected, fiercely independent female merchant, commanding true admiration and respect from everyone she encountered. Thomas often stood quietly in the corner of her thriving shop, watching her negotiate with seasoned sea captains and wealthy nobles. The intimate, joyous wedding at Oakhaven was a beautiful celebration of two mature souls who had finally found their true equals. But Thomas, understanding the heavy, lingering ghosts that still haunted the northern mountains, made a profound decision for their shared future. He relocated their newly united family to a bustling, sunlit coastal city far away from the dark, cold shadows of Blackwood Castle. The air in this vibrant southern port was always incredibly warm, carrying the soothing, endless scent of exotic spices and fresh salt water. There, surrounded by the calming rhythm of crashing ocean waves, Catherine finally discovered her own extraordinary, undeniable calling. She began to work with the fine, pure clay found in abundance along the beautiful, sun-baked coastal cliffs. Her gentle hands, which had once scrubbed cold stone floors and nursed a dying mane, now shaped the smooth earth into breathtaking works of art. She crafted exquisite, delicate figurines and beautiful artisanal goods that seemed to carry a profound, quiet magic within them. Customers often remarked that holding her delicate creations brought them an unexplainable, deeply healing sense of inner peace. Word of her remarkable talent and her soothing artistic vision quickly sped throughout the wealthy, influential merchant guilds of the busy harbor. Catherine opened a beautiful, sunlit shop facing the ocean, managing the complex trade accounts with the same quiet brilliance she had always possessed. She was no longer merely a rescued governess, nor was she just the sheltered, beautiful wife of a powerful lord. She had transformed into a highly respected, fiercely independent female merchant, commanding true admiration and respect from everyone she encountered. Thomas often stood quietly in the corner of her thriving shop, watching her negotiate with seasoned sea captains and wealthy nobles. Thomas often stood quietly in the corner of her thriving shop, watching her negotiate with seasoned merchants with absolute grace. His silver-gray eyes always shone with overwhelming, unconditional pride and a deep, unwavering reverence for the brilliant woman he had married. He never once tried to dim her radiant light, choosing instead to be the sturdy, reliable anchor that allowed her magnificent ship to sail freely. Their marriage was a true, unshakable partnership built on absolute trust, profound mutual respect, and an unbreakable emotional bond. Little Lily grew up strong and joyful, running freely through her mother's sunlit shop with the warm sea breeze in her dark hair. The painful, distant memory of Henry's broken promises and the freezing, merciless snowstorm now felt like nothing more than a fading nightmare. On a quiet, beautiful evening, Catherine stood gracefully on the wide stone balcony of their grand new coastal home, looking out at the endless horizon. She had survived the bitter, freezing betrayal of an arrogant man to become the undeniable, triumphant master of her own beautiful destiny. As the golden sun slowly set over the calm ocean, Catherine leaned comfortably against her beloved husband's strong, protective shoulder. The silent, waiting shadow of the East Tower was gone forever, permanently replaced by a radiant, powerful woman who had finally built an empire of true love and unbroken peace. Did Catherine's brave journey inspire you? Leaving behind a painful past to build an empire of love and independence is never easy. If you loved this story of healing, empowerment, and second chances, please give this video a like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and follow our channel for more heartwarming and powerful tales. What would you have done if you were in Catherine's shoes? Let us know below.